I'm going to get us started with just kind of a little bit of a context setting about what we're talking about today in terms of when we're discussing signposting and referral systems. Essentially, if we focus back down on looking at what the problem is that we're trying to solve, it is essentially that we know our users usually experience more than one issue and are often accessing our services at a time of extreme distress. We also anecdotally know that our users experience service bounce, so service bounce, hop or jump, the process of users accessing or being referred to or signposted to multiple services to meet the whole cohort of their needs. So where one service can't provide everything a user is in need of, that user will then be bounced around to other services. And this can be kind of at the service user's own bequest, so they can be accessing multiple services at one time, or they can be signposted or referred to other services at one time as well. We're looking at signposting and referral systems today as something that can offer a more holistic solution. So reducing the burden on the user to triage and access other services themselves, but instead providing a more curated service in order to enable that access for other people. But in addition to this, I know we're all really aware of wanting to conserve our limited resources and capacity to ensure that we're deploying and utilizing our services at the most impactful point of a user journey. But I know it can also be sometimes difficult to understand where and how our services can fit together with other services that we're coexisting with. To produce the best results for users. Signposting referral systems and partnerships offer one way of supporting our users, as well as providing an opportunity for us to learn and understand more about how users access services. And that's what this session will explore: the opportunities, the challenges that exist around implementing these systems, as well as looking at what additional insight these systems could generate on the user journey and user experiences. A further note on the terminology before we start. So we're talking about signposting and referral, but I can't talk about those things without talking about mapping as well. So mapping is the process of researching the services available, usually across a geographical area to support users. It can be undertaken to understand the level and gaps in service, but essentially it provides a snapshot in time. We know that mapping initiatives are notoriously difficult to keep up to date and comprehensive because of the sheer scale of the services that are often being surveyed or mapped. Mapping at some levels is usually a prerequisite to forming signpostings or referral systems. But I would say, I think our learning is that this doesn't have to be done on an organization by organization basis. And actually, frontline networks and frontline communities are often instrumental to enabling insight to and links with services. So I guess what I'm saying here is mapping doesn't need to be a standalone thing that is done in isolation. It actually works much better when we're doing that with our networking and community partners. So signposting then, as we're defining it, it's the process of sharing information on other services that may be able to help with the service user. So a user need has been triaged. If at a frontline or access gateway service that cannot be aided or supported, an alternative offer of support from that service can be to signpost to other services that may be better placed to help those service users. It does usually work best when there is a shared level of understanding of the services being provided. So you're not just signposting to organizations that you've heard of, but it's more that you've had a relationship with them. But we're not super clear about how many signposting services at that level are actually developed in collaboration. From our experience, this has tended to be kind of each organization has their own signposting list that they've curated themselves, based on whatever kind of remits and assurances that they have internally. I'd be interested to hear about other experiences around creating signposting lists in collaboration with each other. And then referrals, we talk about these as the end-to-end passing of a user from one service to another. So the user benefits from a warm handover of their information and issues being shared from one service to another. And in an ideal situation, this would be a point of guaranteed access to the referred service, with the referral network providing the infrastructure to services, having a high level of understanding of the other services being provided across the network, and user needs and competencies. Referral networks, to our mind, allow users to access a multitude of services from any network access point, resulting in a no wrong door approach, which I know is something that we've all heard about. But these systems also need to include the necessary partnerships, infrastructure, and support to allow for the transfer of data between organizations, and most importantly, to account for changes in capacity and scope at organizational level as well. We know one of the dangers of implementing referral systems is that you can refer and signpost people to organizations that have no capacity to help additional service users. So that is something that these systems aim to address. Very briefly then, and then I will let other people far more experienced in this take the lead. In terms of what the research tells us about how signposting and referral systems work, we've previously explored the role and value of community partnerships. Oh, sorry, hang on. Oh, thanks, James. We previously explored the role and value of community partnerships and networks. A lot of our most recent learning has come from the evaluation and reporting of the Community Coordinated Support Programme, which presented at the Insights and Learning session last year, and we'll share the details to that recording, that meeting note, when we circulate this as well. This really gave us an insight into the importance of community partnerships between support service delivery networks in order to help people in crisis. And it did touch as well on the process of developing an actual infrastructure, a referral network that sits on top of those community partnerships to better enable access to different services for users across that network. However, to counterbalance that, we know from our work that while the benefits of a single point of access approach for support services is really well acknowledged, the challenges and opportunities around implementing these initiatives haven't been fully explored. And I think we see that time and time again because we continue to hear and discuss this idea around having a single portal or an online portal or a single organization or initiative to support access to our services and other community support services. But that is a tough nut to crack, demonstrated, I think, by the fact that we've been continuing to talk and explore work in this area over a number of years. So this is our addition to that little piece of the puzzle. We're hoping we can take some incremental steps further to explore and understand more about what we need in order to progress this part of our work. And finally, just to say that we know signposting and referral networks are just one of a series of tools that enable us to deliver and monitor the impact of delivering the right service at the right time and, crucially, in the right way. We can use these sessions in future to explore other models we have done in the past. This is all about building a picture. And I'm really pleased that we're joined by an amazing array of speakers today who are going to share their learning and insight on what goes into building a signposting or referral system and how these tools are being used and developed to improve our work. So let's get started. We're going to start off by looking at what goes into developing a system, identifying some of the key elements required for success, and exploring the barriers and challenges to implementation too. Here with us today is Liz Reed, the Network Development Coordinator at the Liverpool Access to Advice Network. This network is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. Liz, could you give us a bit of an overview on how the network started and the systems that it's developed since then?
Yes, certainly. So the network started as a project that grew out of a report done by the University of Liverpool. They did a report for the Equalities and Human Rights Commission on the impact of LASPO. I think the report was published in 2018. And what it showed was that the advice sector in Liverpool was quite a fragile ecosystem. There weren't a large number of organisations. I think the number of advice organisations in Liverpool is relatively small in terms of like the kind of level of demand for advice. And what was key to the sector was there was a large number of a gateway or other support organisations who were kind of part of that ecosystem really, and played a key part in relation to either signposting or referrals. As part of the Access to Justice project, which was a partnership between the University of Liverpool, Citizens Advice Liverpool, and funded by the Liverpool City Council, initially on a 1 year by 1 year basis, which didn't help. What the project wanted to do was to try and improve access to legal advice for those residents in need. And what the report found was that clients were waiting quite a long time in order to access advice. And also they were being signposted to a range of organisations really that weren't appropriate for the advice that they needed. So that the project really was about trying to build more collaborative working and understanding about which organisations are where and what they do. And they undertook a mapping exercise as part of that project. And then a key other thing was to implement an online referral system to help get those clients to the advice that they needed in a more streamlined or better way for them, so that they weren't going from pillar to post. So the network then started in October 2020. And so we are relatively new, as you said. We have currently about 120 member organisations made up of a range of advice organisations, community-based support organisations, local authority departments, local universities and their law clinics, health organisations, and some solicitors and the local law society as well. And so one of the things that the Access to Justice project kind of implemented was an online referral system called ReferNet. So this is kind of an existing system. It's not a bespoke system that was built. It's an existing system. And so the project pays for the license, so obviously the cost to using the system. And we don't pass that cost on to ReferNet users at the moment. Where we can, we find funding to pay for that in order to kind of encourage people as much as possible to join. We kind of tried to make it free for people to use it. So the referral system was implemented in 2020. And then obviously at that point, as you can imagine, COVID hit, and therefore advice services, along with other organisations, kind of closed the doors and weren't doing face-to-face services. So actually the online referral system was really useful at that point, although it had a smaller number of users. But what they did do at that time was they did self-referrals, so that clients could access the system and make a referral through to an advice organisation. I think that worked kind of well. But as you can imagine, because there was only a few organisations on the system, including Citizens Advice Liverpool, those organisations were kind of inundated. So since the end of COVID, we've switched off the facility for self-referrals, like most other areas. at the moment, because of like post-COVID and the cost of living crisis, and the level of demand for advice has kind of gone through the roof, and there's an issue around capacity. So self-referrals isn't available. So with the ReferNet system, user organisations can set up as many users as they want in order to access that system. It's a secure system. People have to log in with a username and password. But once logged in, they can either make or receive referrals of clients specifically. And it's I would say, a fairly simple system to use. I think it's quite user-friendly. They can provide either as much client details as they want, or whatever is the minimum requirement, which would usually be the client name, date of birth, contact details, and a brief description of what the client needs. Although people can attach other documents, they can provide more information as needed. So through the system, organisations make a referral to a specific organisation, and that receiving organisation can either accept or decline that referral. If that referral is declined, then the referring organisation can choose another organisation to refer to. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, how the system works. In terms of where we're up to at the moment, we have I think it's about 30 organisations on ReferNet, which is a couple out, including a couple of other organisations in Merseyside, and then local organisations. Some of the, I think, probably some of the barriers and challenges that we face with ReferNet is around trying to get enough advice organisations to join. I think there's a bit of a critical mass, really, with advice organisations being on the system, so that other organisations can make those referrals to a wider variety of organisations. As I said earlier, Citizens Advice Liverpool was on quite early on, particularly during the COVID period. To date, they still remain, I think, the organisation with the highest number of referrals received, rather than they do make referrals, but they're the highest number. I mean, partly that's to do with the nature of a citizen's advice, in as much as they provide a wider scope of advice than most other organisations. But also, I think, because they're a well-known organisation, they are kind of like referred to quite regularly. So I think one of the key kind of, I guess, challenges in operating an online referral system is thinking about what people understand about other organisations in the sector, particularly advice organisations, and what they do. So on the online referral system, ReferNet, that we use, user organisations write a profile for themselves and describe what they do, what advice they give. And what we found that is, if the profile isn't specific and clear enough, then it can result in some inappropriate referrals, which slows down the process of those clients getting to the advice. And an example of that might be, I don't know, let's say Citizens Advice Liverpool describe that they do housing advice, which they do some housing advice, but it is a kind of fairly general level. They're not specialist advisors. So because they've ticked the housing advice box, they can end up getting kind of referrals that really are at specialist level and need to go to a different organisation. So the better that those profiles are written, the better it is for making clearer and better referrals. One of the other issues in terms of getting organisations to join up is that, I suppose, the level of bureaucracy in relation to a data sharing agreement. So a data sharing agreement has to be signed between organisations where they are wanting to share client data. So we have a data sharing agreement that's a standard data sharing agreement that all partners sign up to who are joining the ReferNet system. Strangely enough, small organisations are quite quick on signing up, but larger organisations, where they have a greater degree of, I guess, GDPR and IT kind of expertise in their organisation, it really slows down the process. And I think it's probably better from a scrutiny point of view, but it does mean that it takes organisations much longer to sign up. And then there's a range of policies that organisations need. So they need GDPR, IT, management, safeguarding, etc. I mean, most organisations should have those in place. It's just whether they are robust and they've been recently reviewed. And then the other key issues that we found with the system is that staff in organisations change quite a bit. People move on, and they don't always pass on the information about Referrnet. They certainly don't tell us when they've moved on from the organisation. So we have a kind of like a out-of-date contact people and out-of-date users on the system where we don't know whether they are still operating or not, or whether they've left the organisation. And in terms of kind of keeping in touch with those organisations, it can make it a little trickier in terms of us trying to contact users to let them know about anything they need to know about or new updates. And there is a broadcast email part of the system, which is great for passing on messages. But as I say, in terms of that main contact in the organisation, if they leave, then potentially we don't know that they've left, and information isn't get through as clearly. One of the other things that I think is key to the implementation of an online referral system is having the resources. And I think obviously having the funding to have resources in place is absolutely critical. So the funding, obviously, that we get pays for the license for the system. I think if we didn't get funding, then we would have to pass the cost of that license on to users. In my experience, that's where there's a bit of a stumbling block, I think, certainly for a system that's relatively new. So we're at what, 3 years? I think that is relatively new compared with other organisations, including Norfolk, I think, who we're talking today, who have been operating one for quite a long time. Yet, so the cost is something that organisations don't usually want to pay. I was involved in a similar project in Citizens Advice Sefton about 9 years ago, where we introduced Referrnet. And initially, people were joining up, and then after the funding ran out, I think it was after a year, it just dropped off a cliff, really, because people really weren't that convinced by the system that they were, I suppose, willing and able to find the funds to pay towards the costs of the system. And then the other key thing around resources is funding for somebody to work on implementing the actual system. So we are currently Legal Education Foundation funded, and part of that funding included a referral engagement lead role, which was aimed at specifically working on the online referral system. And we recognised that previously we had like a network development coordinator role, and there wasn't a lot of capacity to spend on Referrnet specifically, so it was important to have dedicated resources. So we had a person in post for 7 months. It was only for a year. They then left to get another job because obviously they were concerned about having employment in a year is quite a short time period. So I think if you can, it's better to have multiple years of funding for that particular role. And the role is key in terms of really networking with organisations and talking to them about not just the online referral system, but how they do signposting the referrals and how they receive referrals that are around outside of any online system. And then also to talk about the system, to describe it, to kind of like give them a bit of a demo of the system, and to update them on the organisations who are actually currently on that system, and really to have conversations with them about how that organisation might best use Referrnet. And we have a couple of organisations who have legal aid contracts. So there are different processes for checking eligibility for those clients for that advice. So a couple of organisations have got two different entries on the ReferNet system, one to deal with their kind of general clients and one for their legal aid clients. And I think having a person dedicated to working with the organisations to see how it might work best is really useful. The other thing that Interdeca did for us was looking at the profiles of the organisations, as I mentioned earlier, that's a key point, and making suggestions about how that can be improved to help streamline those referrals. And then having that contact person, if something goes wrong, is really, really useful. It means people can just get in touch and say, oh, I think I forgot my password. I don't know how to get a new one or whatever, or something fairly simple. And obviously there's somebody there who can deal with those queries. And then kind of finally thinking about the role of partnership and collaborative working. I think that's absolutely key to the development and the implementation of the system. And so obviously as a network, we are all about partnership and collaborative working. And so we provide opportunities for network members to meet either at network meetings, training sessions or workshops. And we provide a collective voice. So we do kind of collective responses on either consultations or policy implementation where it affects the advice sector in Liverpool. And we also work together to co-produce an advice strategy for Liverpool, which sets out what the sector needs in terms of both funds, but also ways of operating to help really influence organisations like the local authority around how they develop policy and how they can work with us so they're not developing policy that creates even more demand for advice services. So as part of the work that we do, our network meetings provide an opportunity for organisations to attend, a bit like this meeting does, talk about what they do and how they do it, talk about any new projects that they've got coming up, and they can talk also about how people either signpost or make referrals. And I think that's really useful for people to kind of update their understanding of what organisations are out there and what they do. And so we are committed to doing that on an ongoing basis. We're currently working on developing a new website for LATAM, which will hopefully include a list of network members and some brief details about it. And hopefully that will provide an opportunity for people to certainly look at what organisations are involved. So even if they're not signed up to the online referral system, then they can think about signposting in terms of how best to signpost or refer clients outside of that online referral system.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Liz. That was an incredible tour de force. Any questions for Liz, please do pop them in the chat. I'm just going to take the exception this moment just to ask one very brief follow-up question, because I think so much of what you talked about has really demonstrated the amazing potential and value in creating a network and community to explore some of these issues and support user issues. But it's obviously not an easy path then to demonstrate the benefits necessarily of a referral network kind of placed on top of that. Is there kind of anything that you've learned from your work, specifically around kind of trying to, I guess, manage both those systems, the network and partnership side and the referral network side? Any particular kind of really hard sells or really hard pushbacks you've got on the systemized element of kind of formalizing that into a referral network?
I think the difficulty of having both sides of kind of like running a network and trying to operate the online referral system is that unless you've got the resources, you're only going to do it superficially. So our online referral engagement lead left a couple of months ago. Since then, I don't have time as the coordinator to do much in relation to and certainly haven't got the capacity to go out and kind of promote it and work with organisations to join up. I think that's a really key thing where I'm only part-time as the Network Development Coordinator, which means that it's trying to fit a lot into the few days that I work on the network, which just doesn't leave time for the online referral system. In relation to, I suppose, trying to implement the system and other organisations' response to it, I think lots of organisations have their own way of doing things in relation to they might happen to know a person specifically in an organisation, and they'll say, right, I'll just pick up the phone, it's so much easier, or I might just send a quick email. And I think yes, it is easy, but it leaves I think certain gaps and certain concerns. One is if you're emailing to somebody about a client, you must use encrypted email. In my experience, there have been organisations that don't do that. They kind of go, oh, I'll email Mary Blogs and they'll include client details. Obviously, that's really, really risky and shouldn't be done. And then the other thing is that it results in one person taking on that, not necessarily taking on those clients, but feeling pressured to take on those clients. And what it also doesn't give you is the opportunity to understand the level of different referrals made to different organisations. Sorry, I forgot to say about the system is that there is a reporting mechanism, so you can pull off how many referrals have been made, what advice areas they've been made about, how long it takes for organisations to accept or decline the referrals. Excuse me, and that's quite useful. I think Refernet is slightly limited from a reporting point of view. We think really, but at least there is that opportunity. If you're relying on that signposting or those phone calls or emails for referrals, then you're not going to get a picture either as an organisation who receives referrals or as an organisation who regularly makes referrals. And I think that's one of the clear benefits of an online referral system. And I think also once we manage to discuss and kind of encourage and support people to join the system, I think it does really play an important part in terms of that partnership and collaborative working, so that people feel that there are slightly less barriers for small organisations that are gateway and support organisations rather than advice organisations. And we find that they're actually quite keen to join Refernet because it gives them access to that specialist level advice, which they wouldn't ordinarily have quick kind of access for their clients. And so they see it as quite useful in that respect. So it tends to be where there's advice organisations who are incredibly busy, and understandably, they're concerned about it being another channel for receiving kind of a demand for advice, really. I think currently it's a very real concern for advice organisations, and I'm guessing around the country, but particularly in the sector in Liverpool. There is the opportunity for people to switch off the system and not receive referrals for a time period if they're struggling with capacity. I think going back to my point about that critical mass of organisations, that if somebody refers to an advice organisation and they don't have the capacity, the issue is that there aren't necessarily that many other advice organisations that they can refer to. So as an example, immigration advice in Liverpool is extremely limited. So if somebody does a referral to an organisation, they really haven't got anywhere else to go if that organisation isn't accepting referrals. So that is a concern. But I think one of the things for us is that because we don't have that resource at the moment, the referral engagement lead, it's an opportunity for us to kind of pause and reflect and take a bit of a time to think about how best to use the system. If we were talking about recommending an online referral system to other people, I think I would say rather than trying to build up a large number of organisations, think carefully about what organisations to start off with. Maybe if you only start off with 4 organisations who work closely together, understand what each other does, and start referring to each other, maybe that's perfectly fine.
Thanks so much, Liz. A couple of points there that I hope we'll pick up as well around kind of how to start off these initiatives and piloting. But I think another useful opportunity to highlight a blanket point around this is that signposting and referral systems do not increase capacity at frontline organisations at all. In fact, as Liz has just demonstrated, they can further exacerbate capacity issues if we're just funneling through. So I think just a precursor statement is that any initiatives that are enabling access for users to advice services have to come along with some kind of recognition that this is going to increase the capacity demand at those services just across the board. Liz, thank you so much. I'm going to move us on now, because from what Liz has said, it's really clear that the key to the success of any signposting or referral network is the partnerships and relationships between organisations that underpin them. Our next speaker is Isabel Langdale, project manager of the Women's Homelessness Project with Homeless Link. Isabel, you're going to be giving some overview of other examples of collaborative, community-focused approaches to support users in crisis.
Brilliant. Okay. So as Martha's kindly said, I am from Homeless Link. I'm the project manager on the Women's Homelessness Project. For those who don't know, Homeless Link, we are a national membership organisation for organisations working with people experiencing homelessness. So that's a real variety, from very small organisations doing day centres and hostels to local authorities. The Women's Homelessness Project itself is part of our national practice development team. So we're focused on supporting the sector to improve their response to homelessness, and obviously this project is specifically on women's homelessness. We had the first stage of the project, which is a grants giving programme, and that resulted in a report that was the Insights and Learning report, that made a series of recommendations. I've included the ones specifically here today for services and funders on what was learned around working together and partnership working. The focus on working together and partnership working is something that really came out in the report, and was also obviously a decision, as part of the decision-making process in terms of who received the grants in the first place as well. Obviously, as we all know, and we've spoken about today already, is that people don't have single issue lives, and we need to respond to all aspects of their needs. But I think specifically the Women's Homelessness Project really focuses on this because women have an even broader range, if you can imagine, of needs, and generally projects will only really be successful if they acknowledge that and start from the principles of working together. So the second stage of the project has been going on for a couple of years now. I'm leading on the project at the moment, and there are various different aspects of this work. One, which I'm going to be focusing on today, is the development of a framework for services to consider how they can improve their response to women, and consider how gender makes a difference to people's experience. And as part of that framework, one of the principles of delivering a gender-informed service is working together. So I'm going to be kind of presenting a little bit more in detail on what are the findings of this framework, what the tips are to putting it in place in the organisation, and also a couple of the case studies that are referenced in the framework. So that framework, just for context, is going to be produced very early next year. And so this is a little, yeah, what do you call it? sneak peek. There we go. So this is the first sneak peek. We also created artwork for the framework alongside Women with Lived Experience. And this is one of the pieces that they created, and it was about good relationships and building community, and that as being the key to developing their success and moving on from their homelessness. So why work together? This is a start. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir as you've all turned up to this event. But some of the key reasons why the women themselves identified and other organisations identified for working together is firstly, obviously, better outcomes for women. And I think that's one of the things that we really wanted to emphasise in kind of our work in this presentation is it's kind of thinking about, if we're thinking about the user journey, thinking about the woman at the heart of this, how do we support her to access the help that she needs at the time that she needs in a way that's going to really actually enable her to engage with the support effectively. So the first one is obviously increasing access to services and getting a faster access to services, flexibility, centering that woman's needs and wishes, thinking about at what time will she be ready to engage with that support? How am I facilitating a situation in which when she feels ready to engage, she is able to? Supporting from a broad range of services that have the skills and knowledge to help effectively. And the other thing that I really wanted to emphasize was those better relationship with services. So obviously it's thinking about not just kind of the referral systems, and I think the presentation by Liz really highlighted this. It's about those kind of relationships that develop as a consequence and the ability to kind of build those relationships through this kind of shared network. And that seems to be one of the things that comes out time and time again about the benefits of working together and building up that local community support. And it's about breaking down those barriers between services. And I think this is also a really important one that comes up again, which is pooling resources. So thinking about organisational capacity, I think that's one of the other things Martha highlighted as well. We all have limited capacity. How are we able to use our resources most effectively? And it's not just a matter of kind of making sure that, you know, a person who's using our services and could be supported way more effectively by another service is given that necessary direction. But it's also about thinking about our actual physical resources, our spaces. Do I have a room which is more effective for another service for a particular event? Or am I able to share a piece of training as well? So maybe one organisation, we all know, you know, we have a lot of training needs and not necessarily the resources to supply that training. Is there another organisation who might be able to have a specialism that they can deliver training to my staff on? So thinking about resources in that really broad sense. Sharing responsibility as well. So obviously the woman that we're talking about, generally we work with single homeless women. We think about services that put single homeless women at the point of homelessness. So we're talking about women who have high needs and a lot of support needs at the time. So we're thinking about often managing risk. How do we manage risk? How do we share responsibility? How do we stop people from falling through the gaps in services? And I think a lot of this comes out, obviously, within women's homelessness, we're talking about kind of case conferences, obviously at the most sharpest end, Marek conferences. How are we getting involved in sharing that risk, sharing that responsibility for people who otherwise might fall through the cracks? And this is actually a quote from one of the women in the art workshops we ran, who spoke about that feeling of falling through the cracks. I think actually another quote I want to reference, which I didn't include in this, was often we think about designing and developing systems which mean that we have one point of access. You know, a woman will go to one service and be able to access all of these services. And I think one of the women in the workshop that we spoke to, she was saying, I've seen the NHS have that in their policies. That's brilliant that they include that in their policies, but sometimes I've got to shout really, really loud to get that support in the first place. So I've got to go and tell every service. Theoretically, I'm only supposed to tell my story once. I've actually got to go around and tell every single service time and time again, because otherwise I just won't get the support that I need. So it's not just thinking about how do we streamline systems, also how do we make sure that everyone's working on the same page, everyone gets it and is responding and is trained and supportive of each other. So that goes on with increasing cross-sector skills and knowledge. So then these are a few tips of how to work together. So again, this has all come out of resources that have existed for quite some time in the women's sector, and I think have a lot of applicability outside of the women's sector as well. So women's centres, we know, have kind of long been established, and they tend to work with women affected by the criminal justice system, but also work with women who aren't affected by the criminal justice system and might be. And they've got a lot of knowledge, I think, in delivering kind of the services, co-located services and multi-agency support. So a lot of this information is kind of drawn from them, as well as the homelessness sector. So it's that single point of access for support from multiple agencies. So obviously this, I think we're probably most familiar in terms of thinking about co-location and multi-agency support. So is there, I think this is particularly important for women and comes to, again, like, how do I convene an opportunity where all our services can be delivered in one place? So instead of the time, I guess the need and the time that it takes for a person to go from one service to another physically, is there a possibility that we can kind of convene all the services in one place at one time, so that a person can come to the place and think about what's the need that I want to respond to right now? I've got a domestic abuse service here, I've got a housing service, I've got a debt advice service. What do I want to do? Do I want to go get domestic abuse support first, or do I want to go get debt advice first? And whenever all the services are kind of convened in one location, there's an ability for the person to choose and make that decision for themselves about where they want to go, what need they want to address first. And then maybe they can come back the next week and think about the other one. Developing a clear partnership agreement which sets out the roles and responsibilities. I think a lot of you are familiar with that work, which is thinking about kind of, if I am convening these partnership working agreements, how are we all clear on what my job is, what my role is here, and how to not step on each other's toes. And also in terms of thinking about funding as well. What do we deliver? What's our specialism? And how do I support others to deliver their specialism as well? I think that's particularly important when we're thinking about working with by and for organisations. How do I support other organisations in the sector to thrive and benefit from my resources and be able to support the building of their capacity as well? And how do I do that with being clear about my roles and responsibilities here? Again, understanding the limits of your provision. So that comes back to that as well. We all know that someone else might be best placed to support. We might want to help with everything, but someone else might be in a better position to do that. Identifying opportunities with key partners for resource and knowledge sharing. So as I've mentioned, there's kind of peer training opportunities, but also reflective meetings, taking time to come together and think about what's working well, what's working not. Again, maybe going back to that partnership agreement in terms of the roles and responsibilities. Is there anything we can change to reflect kind of the changing nature of our work, how we might want to respond differently? And then I think thinking on a kind of casework level, when multiple agencies are working with one woman, obviously we've used woman here, but that's interchangeable, works for a lot of different situations as well. It can be quite overwhelming when you've got multiple different agencies working with you. You don't know who's your first point of contact. You've got multiple people calling you all the time, always on numbers you don't recognise. Thinking about, if we're working with one woman, how can all of us be, again, clear about our roles and responsibilities, and maybe thinking about appointing one person to lead that case, who has a better relationship with the woman. Let the woman decide, obviously, who do they have the best relationship with, who would they like to lead the casework. And there's a really, I think, Single Homelessness Project have developed a resource called Team Around Me, which is a case conferencing tool for organisations, so they can kind of be clear and set out what we're doing, what we're all adding to this, who's communicating, and how do we make that most effective. And this all comes back to kind of working with a person. So allowing them to control the pace of work and thinking about, how do I give them the power here to decide who I want to engage with, when I want to engage with them. So it's not overwhelming, and you're giving person agency to resolve their own situation and decide what's best for them. I think this again comes back to also funding cross-sector partnerships. So this was a big thing that came out of the Insights and Learning report, was a big recommendation for funders thinking about funding these cross-sector partnerships. As Liz has already explained, it does require a certain amount of funding to, especially if you think about the additional possibilities of knowledge sharing, peer training, reflective meetings. That's all time for someone to coordinate. So thinking about, how do you facilitate that if you're a funder? So we just have a couple of short case studies that are included in the book as well. So this one I'm going to focus a bit more on, because it's about the Coventry Women's Partnership, which includes the Coventry Law Centre. So obviously has some more relevance. So the Coventry Women's Partnership is very focused on breaking down barriers for women in accessing services and streamlining the support. So it's led by FWT, which is the Centre for Women, and includes Coventry my things. But yeah, it includes a number of support services, as you can see here. And significantly for us, it includes Kairos, which is a service that works with women experiencing homelessness and sexual exploitation. So Coventry Women's Partnership does a number of the things that we've already spoken about. They've been funded for quite a long time now, so they've really kind of developed the support that they offer. They're really focused on women's needs specifically, so they make sure that the services involved in the partnership cater to those various different gendered needs that a woman might have, and also have developed a certain amount of knowledge in terms of how do they respond to women's needs specifically. So, for example, domestic abuse support. Thinking about the partnership enables them to think about how do we support a woman to be safe when accessing our service? Maybe one of our services has a safe location, and that's where the woman can access the support from. Also thinking about kind of how do we support each other to train each other on those gendered needs. So Kairos might offer training on sexual exploitation to the other partners. So I think that kind of focus on women's needs specifically can be helpful in thinking about how have we covered all of those various different gendered needs. How are we thinking about childcare responsibilities? How are we thinking about how do we facilitate childcare to help someone accessing our service? So that's one way to think about it, thinking out with that frame in mind, is that have we made sure that the various different needs a woman might be satisfied by our partnership. And also the Coventry Women's Partnership led by FWT, they coordinate those peer trainings and reflective practice that we've spoken about. They also coordinate the Wonder Woman Wednesdays drop-ins. This is run by Kairos in the Kairos Women's Centre. And in this drop-in centre, they run it every week, and the function of it is that anyone can come in for a cup of tea, a chat, lunch, a shower, and then services are also there if they would like to access that support. So I think Emma, who is the lead caseworker from Kairos, was describing how it kind of creates a space in which there might be a moment that might transform a woman's experience. So, for example, she was explaining how when a woman might want to, like, someone might be considering offering her a script, which is methadone prescription. She might not be ready to make that decision, but she might come back. She might have a conversation, have a cup of tea. Next week, she might come have some lunch. She might talk to some people. And then after a few weeks of attending a drop-in, she might think, you know what, actually, now I've met these people, now I've built a relationship with these various different services, I now might be able to get the support of that drug and alcohol support service and get the script that's offered to me. So it's, yeah, at the heart of it, it's also building those relationships and allowing someone choice and control over how they access support.
Isabel,
yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to ask that we wrap it up there. I know you've got a couple more examples which are really, really incredible, and we'll circulate these and maybe we'll pick them up at a future session. So apologies for rushing you. But yeah, final summarization.
Absolutely. So I'm just gonna, definitely skip the next case study, but I'll send it out to you as well. But I think the last thing is just thinking about measuring success. So focusing on funding outcomes and requirements. So obviously the kind of partnership working we've been speaking about does require a certain level of flexibility. Maybe thinking about kind of the outcomes as down the line, not necessarily the immediate referrals, not how many referrals you're making, but thinking about the outcomes of kind of, if someone attended a drop-in maybe 50 times, did they eventually at some point get domestic abuse support? How many women got domestic abuse support? How many women got eventually went on script? These are kind of long-term outcomes rather than thinking about those immediate referrals as the measurement of success. And thinking about kind of qualitative methods of gathering feedback as well. So case mapping, case studies. And I think that's it as well. Obviously, we mentioned gendered outcomes a lot as well. So thinking about kind of relational outcomes rather than just kind of those hard outcomes. So increased confidence and self-worth. I think that's me for now. And I've included my email address. So please do get in touch if you have any more questions.
Isabel, thank you so much. We'll circulate this, and I'm sure we'll get lots of stuff back from people as well wanting to pick this up in further detail, particularly around outcomes in general. I know this is another area that we could continue to speak more and more about. For the time being, moving us on, we've heard about the circumstances that lead to and foster the development of referral systems, but what goes into actually building one? And with that, we welcome Dan Such, Director of CAST, who's now our essentially resident expert on building cross-sector referral tools and using an inclusive design approach. Dan, over to you.
Righty, what an introduction. Thank you, Martha. Hello, everyone. Those presentations have been amazing, and I'm going to try and focus on bits that weren't said, but largely I agree with everything that's just been said. They were both really brilliant. I suppose I'm here today to represent kind of three organisations. The first is Step Change, which is a consortium across Greater Manchester, 11 organisations across Greater Manchester, plus an experts by experience group. They have been working to understand how to better connect services across Greater Manchester for a few years, and in particular we're looking at what tools and support systems can help them do that better. They did kind of 6 months of really deep research into the various different approaches around referral, but I'm also here representing Disrupt Foundation, who I think we met at the last session, and CAST, the charity where I work. We focus on trying to help other social organisations figure out how to use digital data and design in their work, and the three of us together are trying to kind of figure out, by learning from the Step Change Consortium across Manchester, how can we create the sorts of tools that are scalable, but that also kind of deeply support individuals to access the services in the most efficient and effective way. So thinking about what that looks like from a design and implementation perspective, the one thing I will repeat that we've heard earlier is so much of this is about the practices and the relationships of the existing community. To be really kind of like rule of thumb, if there's funding for this sort of work, only about a third of it needs to go anywhere near the technology. About a third of it should be for the existing team to come to step in and explore how to work, and then maybe about a third then focus on kind of new ways of working together. But the tech bit is super important for efficiency and for scalability and for making things easier, but it's all built on the real everyday practices, motivations of the people who are going to be using these tools, and the people on this call, the people who are involved in these ongoing conversations. So thinking that through, then, what does it take to build these systems? Well, the first, as we heard a little bit in the last presentation, is being really user-led and test-driven. And what we mean by that is not just thinking about how we want to behave or how we know can work for good referrals and good signposting, but aligning with people's actual behaviours and motivations. I've been involved in funding and developing tech for good for about 20 years, and that's still the biggest thing that we get wrong, is we often design systems for how we want to behave as a partnership or how we want to behave as individuals, rather than how we actually do. And that's not a criticism of anyone, it's just if we don't design for real behaviours and motivations, then the thing doesn't get used very well. So it doesn't really solve any problems. So the first is, how do we really kind of understand the needs and the behaviours and the motivations of the people who are going to be using this tool, and then test out very small ways of solving their problems so that we can create better referrals or better signposting. The second part of that then is thinking about kind of what the real problems are that are stopping signposting or stopping referrals from working. And one we've heard a few times today is around capacity management. I don't think there's a tool that will help signposting and referrals that doesn't address capacity management, being really clear about who has capacity or who doesn't. And very often that's seen as an extra piece to referrals and signposting. It's deeply embedded within the kind of the challenges of why referrals don't work as well as they could do. Is not understanding who has the specialism or who has the right capacity or who has that time and ability to respond. So really kind of that early deep user research or really deep kind of research at the start, trying to understand and log kind of how do we understand who has capacity to do what, and how long does that information stay real for? And one of the challenges within our sector is kind of what constitutes our organisation, or the skills we have within our staff or skills within volunteers, or the context is changing pretty dynamically. Sometimes a piece of information on the website might be right for a week. Sometimes it might be right for all the year, apart from the day before an event happens, and being really clear about kind of how long information kind of lasts for, or how accurate it can be, is critical to understanding capacity management, which is critical to understanding whether people can accept referrals or signposts, and then how we then do that well. So a real kind of barrier, I think, that we've kind of understood more of as we've explored this work is what information is stable, about the events, about the expertise, and about capacity. And if we can't be kind of clear about those, then signposting referrals won't work very well. The other real challenge in all of this is, and the language is a little bit clunky, but we have insight, knowledge, and kind of events within a formal system, within kind of the charitable organisations that are doing this work, but also huge amounts of insight, knowledge, learning experience within kind of the informal communities, people who have lived experience. And that kind of information is very rarely kind of published or held within referral systems. And yet it plays a really significant part in how people discover who to talk to, when to talk to them. And if we treat them as separate kind of entities, like the insight and knowledge within communities and the insight and knowledge within charities, then we're only ever kind of talking about half the information that's available. So again, referral systems don't kind of work quite well because they're not aligning all that insight and information. So there's something really critical about how do we bring those together in designing solutions to help people kind of navigate all the available support and resources that are available to ensure they access the support. So one of the questions I was asked to then explore is like, what on earth do we do about this? Particularly kind of what's the role of funding in achieving this? I think it's fair to say that over the last 10, 20 years, there's been lots and lots of small amounts to try and address referral and signposting. It's been an ongoing challenge for all of us for years. And there has been lots of funding, lots of attempts to address this, but there's never been like really significant amounts of aligned funding to do this really well, which means we've got lots of examples of pretty good work. And I would count our work at those. I say it's pretty good. It's not going to solve these problems by any means at the scale that we need them to. So there's something about how do we better align all the work that's going on around this to create interventions and support that actually make a significant difference. And this kind of network, of course, is a really critical part of that. I think there's another step when we're thinking about kind of the role of funding this stuff. And there's a lovely phrase around technology, which is technology is neither good nor bad, but nor is it neutral. So every time we make a design decision, every time we kind of create another piece of technology or another way of doing it, then it means we're making decisions about how effectively it should be used. I would suggest that we need to create some sector-owned technology that we can all benefit from and all contribute to. And one of the, in another part of our work, we focus on how to create open IP. So how to create open source, Creative Commons tools that anyone in the charity sector can use and adopt. And then every time they add another feature because they've got a little bit of funding, everyone else that's using can also benefit from it. And my sense is that might be the only way we can really align funding effectively to ensure we all benefit from the sorts of insights that are being shared today. And that every time someone brings some new insight or some new funding to this, then it goes back and everyone can benefit from it too. So in the role of funding this stuff, I would say we need to certainly kind of fund the open creation of these tools. We really need to focus on the funding for the adoption and the use of these tools and then the improvement that supports everyone. But lots of it, though, is around funding the existing teams to have the time to adopt, to understand their practices, to figure out how to work better, and then to figure out the role of digital within that work. So open IP, I think, is a key message for anyone thinking about like, how do we better share what's going on? And one of the reasons for that, and we've heard this a couple of times today, is it's very rarely our primary motivation to create a really good digital referral tool. Most of our organisations are here because we want to refer well and work well as a network to provide support. And then we become owners of some tools that we have to keep going. But when we think about all the digital tools that we rely on, including kind of Zoom or the email systems, they have incredible teams whose whole focus is to make sure that technology works well. And because they have teams doing that, for lots of money, it means we can rely on them. So one thing I think, another reason why I think we should focus on kind of some shared approaches to this is we need those people who are wholly focused on creating these tools that everyone can have access to and benefit from. But being really honest, it's probably none of us on this call. It's always like a secondary motivation for us. And especially when resources become more limited, especially when a cost of living crisis is there, or we're responding to COVID or whatever it is, our priority is not sustaining or developing a digital tool. It's just delivering direct services and supporting those brilliantly. So I think there's something really important for us to discuss the sector. How do we best work really independently, because that's the nature of our work, but also make significant collective progress. And I think underpinning that is open IP. how we share stuff better, so that those who've got a primary motivation to create these tools can pick that stuff up and make sure we all benefit from it. So that reuse at scale, and I'll definitely kind of consider to kind of talk that through if anyone's particularly interested. But the other thing that I think is worth saying is they're really good, well-established, well-evidenced practice for developing digital tools that support charities and social sector organisations. It's kind of this user-led, test-driven development. One of those rules is that small teams win. So small teams looking at insight and research, making decisions, changing the technology, kind of creating, that's the most effective tool for creating new tools. So that's the effective kind of team shape for creating new digital products and services for referrals and signposting, etc. That doesn't sit comfortably with bringing in experts by experience or consulting widely or talking with big networks of organisations who want to work well together. And actually, it not only does it not work well together, sometimes the best practices for developing digital tools is opposite to the way in which we build great partnerships and collaborations and networks. So there's an emerging field, though, called community tech, which is how do we involve anyone who the use of technology has an impact on them. That's a really horrible sentence. Anyone who is impacted by the use of technology should be involved in, have a voice, ownership, or be involved in decision making about how that technology is produced. And that means in this instance, it'll be frontline practitioners, if it's a practitioner tool, should be involved in those programs, in that process, whilst recognising it's not their main part of their job. If it's a tool directly for community members, they should be involved or have ownership of these tools. And there's a really emerging sector called community technology that's focused on how do we best bring in the voice, the experience, the needs, the motivations of those who are going to be using the tool in a way that shapes the tool itself. We are currently kind of developing the very first version of this, the tool for Greater Manchester. The very first version of it will be slightly underwhelming, because as we give it to people in real life, we want to see them kind of tell us where it's wrong so we can put the resource into the bits that are wrong and make it better. But at the heart of the work that we're trying to do is this aligning community needs, behaviours and expectations, their ownership of how the product develops, whilst recognising we want to get to the point where it can be used at scale because it's open IP and available for reuse. So there's lots going on. Later on this month, certainly early next month, I'll put together a video that has a walkthrough of the product that we've created based on these principles, because we're almost there. It's not quite ready yet. We've got another round of testing first. But overall, I think there's a really important role for funders to think about how we can support collective progress. I think there's a really important role for all of us to recognise that the technology is just a bit, and it's mostly about aligning practices, whether that's the legal practices, data sharing practices, kind of ways of referring, and critically, how we be honest and clear about the capacity we have, and how the information is kept up to date about what capacity we have, what services we can offer. There's so much. Thank you for the presentations. They were great. Martha, back over to you.
Dan, thank you so much. Just so inspiring to hear you articulate all the issues that we experience and are facing in such an amazing way. Thank you so much for continuing to come back to this community and share all your wisdoms and learning and insight with us, and we'll definitely kind of keep up to date with the Compass release and have you back to further sessions. I'm afraid this is part of your job now, to share again with us as this tool continues to develop and update. And do a terrible job at sharing this because I think everyone's contributions are just so amazing to hear. But let's look at now a more well-established referral network. It's been referenced a couple of times. Ben, the director of the Norfolk Community Advice Network, is with us today. Ben, can you give us a quick overview of the NCAN and what it's doing now and how you've managed to make it sustainable?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've got some slides that I can share very quickly. There are quite a lot of them, so we might have to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Can you all see that?
Can do, yes.
Is that full screen now for everyone?
Yes.
I mean, this will cover a lot of the same ground that Liz covered. You know, she talked very extensively and very passionately about the kind of referral model and highlighted some of the key concerns. For us as Norfolk Community Advice Network, we're a little bit further along in that process. And if I run through this, we'll tell you a little bit more about our referral system. It provides a one-door into the diverse VCSE landscape by pooling a wide range of VCSE and other support providers into one platform, as Liz said with ReferNet, so very similar. Our project is a bespoke system that was developed here in Norfolk. So we worked with a developer to identify the key elements of a referral system of a digital platform. That was done in 2012. Integral to the NCAN referral system is the directory of organizations. As Liz said, it's about communicating the organizations that are available to refer through. We have that as a public-facing kind of directory that anyone can access. You can go through that and it will tell you a little bit more about the organizations involved. It will tell you about what their specific area of work that they do and the issues that they'll address. This just provides further information for anyone who is referring. I will talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but analysis and reporting, we've got built-in monitoring and analysis function. The NCAN referral team facilitates the analysis of referrals from and to organizations. That's a key part for us in terms of our demonstration of the direction of travel, of the data around issues that we're seeing, and it allows us to kind of have a little bit of an influence in a campaigning strand that is backed by data in that sense. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about referral in general, so I am just going to run through this very quickly and we'll just kind of go through. But the benefits of referring rather than signposting, organizations who use the referral system report they're more able to refer rather than signpost people as a result of the system. Right, and going back to a little bit about NCAN, here's some of the steering group organizations that sit around the table. Essentially, NCAN is a network. We started as a network. It was initially a legal justice partnership, and that kind of facilitated the need for a referral system, which was developed in 2012. The 9 organizations you see on the screen right now are our steering group, so essentially our board of directors, and they kind of discuss and the direction of travel for the organization, for the sector, and promote that a little bit more as well. Here's a timeline of where we're at now. I think Liz said she was 3 years into hers, so this will give you a kind of little bit of a comparison. So in 2012, we built the first version of the referral system. In 2014, ongoing expansion to include other key stakeholders, including other charities, local authority teams, etc. The referral system was made free to use for any VCSE organisation in 2019. The platform was also adopted in Tower Hamlets, Oldham and Swansea within their own networks in 2021. And in 2022, we agreed an 18-month universal access agreement with Norfolk County Council, which also included the district councils and a few other teams like fire and police. Here's a little look at our current use in terms of referrals by calendar year. So you can see this, and I think there's a little chart at the bottom that gives you a breakdown in terms of the actual numbers. So, you know, you can see it's grown year by year, and last year we had 8,845 referrals in total. We would expect to see similar numbers this year, if not maybe a slight increase on that. But also, you know, as we've talked a lot about capacity and supply and demand, that's very much how we feel in the kind of Norfolk area, and that demand is obviously always a barrier to increasing adoption in that sense. And a little bit more about how we categorize our issues. So on our referral system, essentially, these are the issues that we have as categories. You can select an issue and it will just demonstrate all of the providers that are available to refer to under that issue. So that's a way that we kind of strengthen the messaging, strengthen people's awareness of the services that are around them. You know, we mentioned that in conjunction with the directory, but if you actually select each category, it will tell you which organizations you can refer to, and you can refer to more than one organization as well per referral. Just a very busy page of some of the organizations that we work with here. Loads of organizations in Norfolk, VCSE and otherwise. We also obviously work with statutory partners, and we've kind of expanded that to look at other areas that we can look at providing referral access as well. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. It is obviously free for VCSEs to join and use the NCAN referral system. Our funding model initially was based around a licensing agreement, and that licensing fee would be charged to statutory organizations with an individual per user license fee in addition to that. The universal access agreement superseded that. So for us, the local authorities were able to understand the benefit of having this portal and agreed to kind of negotiate a universal access agreement for a set period that I think comes up to renewal very soon. So that's our kind of funding model with statutory organizations. And obviously just some key features, the person-centered warm handover. I'm sure I don't need to go into that in too much, but that no wrong door approach is key to the ethos of NCAN and what we are trying to represent in that sense. And it's ensuring that when people do go to an advice provider, that they don't have to tell their story more than once, and that they're able to be referred to other organizations within that. Key feature for us, is, as mentioned by others as well, is promotion. That's organizational updates and services included in the NCAN newsletter, which we have we have a abnormally high click-through rate for that for some reason. We post any updates on our announcement board. Our referral platform has a facility where organizations can post announcements themselves. So if there is a reason for them to suspend services or anything along those lines, or they need to make an announcement to other VCSE organizations and statutory partners, they can do that through the referral system, and it's very visible on that front page. If you want to receive referrals, you can be included in the directory and AI chatbot, and that just contributes to the accurate and efficient referral process. And then just a little bit more on evidence and data, and I realize I am running through this, but evidence of demand of services, where it's coming from, evidence of collaborations between you and other organizations, data and insight to use for funding applications, addressing underlying causes of issues and averting costly services. These are all kind of positives and benefits that we've seen from being able to pull the data from the referral system. And as Liz mentioned with ReferNet, I think our data is very similar. It's slightly limited in what you can pull in that respect, but we have ambitions of kind of building a slightly bigger data suite, which is kind of upcoming in a future update. And feature 4, obviously, accountability. Staff can see in action referrals as a team. They get email notifications to confirm that referral has been sent to them. The sending organization gets a notification to say that it's been received and accepted. Your ability to track and monitor referrals in that sense. Data capture and analysis features to understand issue and demands as well. And a little bit more just about the network here. So what we do around networking and collaboration. So we champions, our champions networking events, organizational leader updates with insights into data demands and trends. Our steering group meet every 2 months. We have wider partnership meetings every 2 months that include statutory and VCSE organizations, and is just, as mentioned by others on the call, who have similar forums, just an opportunity to share learning, insight, and get a better understanding between often different areas as well, and to update on projects, of course. So there's an increased knowledge and awareness of what support for people is available through that partnership, and access to e-learning to upskill and raise awareness as well. And this is just a little bit of what we do as a core team. Obviously, we've talked about the directory. We have a helpline for professionals. If they can't identify who it is to refer to, they can call the helpline, and the helpline will support them with identifying the appropriate organization to refer to. That can be used by professionals and members of the public. We have chatbots. We do all our training in-house. So I have an administrator who trains individuals and new users on the system. That takes about an hour, and then we do that engagement work. Mentioned the AI bot. We've mentioned the newsletter, the announcements, the e-learning platform, and the automatic filtering of organizations based on local authority, area, or type of issue. It's a little bit more about the helpline. This is the old promotional flyer I've just noticed, but yeah, that's the helpline that professionals can use as well. And I will wrap this up very shortly because I'm sure we are very pressed for time, but benefits for the client: receiving organization contacts the client, they're referred to the most appropriate agency securely and quickly. Clients don't have to repeat the story is the big one. Benefits for the agency: access multiple organizations from across Norfolk, send client documents, contact details and confidential information securely, track progress of outgoing referrals. Data can be analyzed to help measure your agency's impact, promote shared process and partnership working, and prevent the duplication of triage work. And there's some testimonials, but I will just run through these very quick. I'll leave this up on the screen very briefly for you to have a little read. And a couple more there. And then one more from Norfolk County Council. So that is a very quick version of our referral system. I will see if I can stop sharing There we go. Stop sharing. That's where we're at with our referral system. I think in the context of the presentation Liz gave earlier, it probably shows you about where it can get to, or where a network, with that support of an actual, network that's spread up, not with the initial idea of creating a referral system, but that was part of the process, I believe. The network was the key function and the key form that took. But yeah, this is a little bit further on down the line. This is where we're kind of at. I'm happy to answer any questions about where we're at. We have a team of 5. I probably should have talked about that. We talked about the need for this to be resourced and for a referral system to have that effective kind of staffing, ability to kind of manage, and maintenance and stuff is all done by us in-house. So we do have a team of 5. That is an administrator, a coordinator, myself, the director, but we've also just appointed a campaigns lead to look at areas where we can do some campaigning and influencing, and kind of do that joined up sector approach to that kind of work within Norfolk as well. Our funding mostly comes from statutory sectors. I mean, obviously, it's been very kind of pieced together historically. The Universal Access Agreement kind of covers our core costs, or has for the last 18 months. And we also receive funding from the ICB. We apply for slippage funds. We apply for things as a consortium through NCAN. So their steering organisations will also apply for direct contracts as a result of that, and have been successful in that. But there's usually an element that goes towards the administration of the system as well.
Ben, thank you so much. Thank you for running through everything. If we could have a copy of your slides, we'll definitely share them across as well. I know we'll want to pick this up again. I think particularly your point around utilising and analysing the data and what that's helping you to do, including making the case for future funding, both in the network and in the services that form part of that network as well. I was really pleased to see, I noticed a colleague from Ada Lovelace has joined us today. So on that data and AI point in particular, maybe that's something we can have a future session on to explore further. I'm aware we're going to run over. I'm really sorry, because I'm really aware of the constraints on everyone's time. So if you do need to drop off, please do. But I think we're going to carry on for an extra 5 minutes past our close time, because I just want to give time to Sharon Collard, who's a professor of personal finance and research director. Sorry, a professor and a personal finance and research director at the Personal Finance Research Centre. Sharon, just to give a quick update on some research that you've been involved in, and maybe an overview of kind of continuing this conversation, next steps, where might your piece of research take us?
So, as I mentioned, we're doing this research with Step Change, and it's about supporting debt advice clients specifically. So it's a bit narrower than the things we've been talking about today, but I could be very quick, because I think it has touched upon many of the topics that we've already heard about. So I won't spend too long on it. But we had the opportunity to analyse Step Change client data for the whole of 2022, which was about 187,000 client records. And what we see from that, we've done some analysis of inward referrals to Step Change and outward referrals. And when I talk about referrals, we have slightly fudged it, I think, because it is a mixture of signpost and referrals. But just looking at the kind of origins and destinations, in terms of inward referrals, 37% of Step Change clients in 2022 came from an inward referral, the biggest of those being from a financial services firm, but also utility providers, some other money advice charities, and charities and government bodies. So that leaves about 2/3 of clients who self-referred. And on the other side of the screen, on the right-hand side, 79% of Step Change clients didn't have any outward referral to another organisation for extra support. There were 21% of them did, and the 4 biggest outward referrals from Step Change were for mental health support, not surprising, because that is their biggest area of vulnerability that they see with clients, but also in the cost of living crisis, income maximisation, also abuse support, so that's typically domestic abuse, and bereavement support. And we also talk to Step Change advisors and team members, and we had 3 actionable insight webinars, as we called them, with a range of stakeholders from financial services, utility providers, and support services themselves. And I guess just to kind of summarize, where, as I say, this is very much work in progress, but I think this kind of touches upon and summarizes some of the things we've talked about today. So we kind of, in terms of some kind of agenda for change for the debt advice sector specifically, and for step change, the 6 things that seemed really important in terms of getting referrals right were identifying clients' referral needs in the first place. So things like making sure people understand what's going to happen to the information they disclose. The fact that the second one being that clients actually understand referrals, so they may not know anything about the ecosystem in which they're being sent out to. Is it possible to provide them with that information? Understanding the timing and order of referrals came through quite importantly. I don't think we've got really any answers for that, but also online journeys being really important. Smooth and efficient referrals, and that comes very much down to funding. We've already talked about referring to relevant organisations, and finally, as Ben and others have already touched upon, using feedback loops to improve referrals. So that's a very quick run through of what we found, and clearly chimes very much with what others have found working on a bigger scale in networks rather than with an individual organisation. And I should say we will be publishing something from the work in November.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sharon. It's so interesting to see so many of the things that we've talked about today echoed, but also kind of formalized and put down as future recommendations for us to be mindful as well. I think our overall aim of this session is really to kind of collate all that insight, evidence and learning together, so that we know what next steps we need to be taking. I also know there is a research project that's due to be published next year as well, about how communities are interacting with advice and the pathways that they're taking to support that. That's Nuffield funded, that we'll share the link to when we do the follow-up with this, so everyone can see that. But that's on our radar. That's something else that we want to pick up and add to this, add to the picture on this piece of work as well. Thank you so much for everyone for staying. Apologies again for overrunning slightly, and for having quite an intense session in terms of the amount that we're cramming into these. I hope they are still useful. If there are particular pieces that we should be picking up that you'd be interested in learning more about, please do let us know. We're very happy to schedule some additional sessions to cover these. Thanks finally to all our speakers for all your work in putting together the slides and sharing your work. It's so much valued and appreciated by us and the broader community that we're supporting as well. It's been fantastic to have you here collectively today to share all together. For those who are interested, our next kind of group session will be a meeting of the Justice and Innovation Group, which will be on the 7th of December from 10 to 11:30. Please let us know if you're interested in coming to that. Sign up to the network if you'd like to receive invitations to that. But finally, huge thanks to you all again so much for attending, and look forward to speaking with you all soon. Enjoy the rest of your weeks. Bye.